Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining your American Cancer Society for this exclusive Fund the Future Fireside Chat. Bienvenidos. Gracias por estar con nosotros. I'm Desiree Behringer-Carton, your host for today's program. I'm coming to you live from the Jersey Shore, right outside of New York City, and we're so happy to be here. People are joining us from all over the country, from our Making Strides top fundraisers and Real Men Wear Pink ambassadors to event sponsors and longtime leaders in the fight. I've got to tell you, this group is a force to be reckoned with, and we are so excited to bring you this unstoppable group together on one call for the very first time. So thank you so much for being here with us. We hope you are ready for a really informative session, and you will take advantage of this one-on-one time with a leading breast cancer researcher. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to hear from American Cancer Society researcher Dr. Lauren Terrace, and have the opportunity to ask questions of her directly a little later in the program. So make sure to send in your questions. Quick housekeeping note, because this is a larger group, we have muted all lines except for our speakers, but feel free to drop your questions and comments into the Q&A box throughout the program, and we'll have to dive into those shortly. So again, we're really excited. We have lots of great conversation ahead of us, but before we begin, we'd love to take a moment to welcome and introduce you to Cynthia Farrow. Cynthia is a 30-year volunteer, 2020 American Cancer Society St. George Award winner, and our first ever Making Strides Against Breast Cancer National Volunteer Lead. So it's my honor and pleasure to welcome Cynthia, and she's coming to us live from my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome, Cynthia. How are you?
I am great, Desiree. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be with all of you today to spend this time with some of our most dedicated and passionate supporters from across the nation. Without a doubt, your individual and collective efforts are fueling the American Cancer Society's work to fund the future of breast cancer research. And that is why you, each of you, were personally selected and invited to be a part of this experience today. On behalf of the organization, and as an 8-year breast cancer survivor myself, I'd like to personally recognize and thank each of you for attending this session. Our hope is this session will leave you inspired about the future of breast cancer research, and know that what we are accomplishing now and in the future is because of your support, everything that you do. Now, I know we have a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Desiree.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for all that you do, and we so appreciate you. And you're right, we have a great session lined up, and I'm excited to introduce Dr. Lauren Terrace. As a Senior Scientific Director, Epidemiology Research at the American Cancer Society, Dr. Terrace leads the breast cancer research portfolios for the Department of Population Science. In addition to her own research on these cancers, Dr. Terrace is part of the senior scientific team responsible for cancer prevention studies, surveys, development, and biospecimen acquisition. For those who have been around for a while, might be familiar with our most recent cancer prevention study, CPS3. So we are very excited to have Dr. Terrace with us. Hi there, Dr. Terrace. How are you? Welcome.
Hi, Desiree, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that welcome. And I'm just so happy to be here with all of you today to give you a little glimpse into one aspect of the breast cancer work that we do here at the American Cancer Society in our intramural research program. Not everyone knows that in addition to funding some amazing external researchers from other institutions, a unique aspect of ACS as a health nonprofit is that we also conduct our own in-house research. And I want to tell you a little bit about that today.
I'm excited to hear this, Dr. Terrace, really quick, because you've been a part of the research program for 20 years, so really incredible work. And your current work, you know, we want to hear about that and all the projects you hope to initiate with further funding.
Thank you. All right, let's get started. Jenna, can we get the next slide? All right, so to get started, I wanted to refresh on what breast cancer is in the first place. Breast cancer occurs in the glands that produce breast milk. The most common types of breast cancers occur in the ducts, which you can see in the middle here are the long tubes that carry milk to a baby. Next slide. So part of the life cycle of a cell is to make additional copies of itself before it dies off. If an error develops in the DNA when it's copied, it's usually corrected by the body. However, changes to DNA that are not caught and corrected by the body can lead to a cancer when they're repeatedly copied. So when a group of mutated cells move outside the area where they first developed, this is what we call invasive cancer. So many of you, or maybe all of you, know that breast cancer is the most common cancer in the world. On this map, you can see the countries that are in pink are the ones where breast cancer is the most common cancer among women. And in most of these countries, including the US, it is the most common cancer overall, both including men and women. In 2020, there was an estimated 2.3 million breast cancer cases diagnosed worldwide, and almost 8 million women who had been diagnosed with breast cancer within the last 5 years. This makes breast cancer the most prevalent cancer in the world. In the United States, new diagnoses of invasive breast cancer increased rapidly during the 1980s and 90s. This is particularly for women age 50 and older, which is the top pink line we're looking at on the graph here. This mirrored the rapid uptake in mammography screening that happened during these early decades. So more and more women were getting screened than ever before. However, you can see on the graph that around the year 2000, there was a sharp drop of about 13% in the number of breast cancers. This is thought to be due to the Women's Health Initiative clinical trial results that showed an increase in risk from postmenopausal hormone use to breast cancer and heart disease. So there was a very sharp decline in use of postmenopausal hormones, and that's what we think is responsible for that big decline that we see. But since about the mid-2000s, we started to see a rise again, and we're now seeing about a 0.3% rise in breast cancer incidence rates each year, likely due to other risk factors for breast cancer that are on the rise. When we look at death rates, we see a little bit of a different story from what we see from incidence rates. Breast cancer incidence rates by race are very similar. Particularly among Black and white women, we see slightly higher incidence rates, meaning new cancer diagnoses in white women, but very, very similar in Black women. But when we move to death rates, we see that death rates are much higher in Black women now, about 40% higher. But you can see on this graph that that was not always the case. Back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, death rates were actually very similar between Black and white women. But major advances in early detection and treatment were made in this time, and the Black-white disparity in breast cancer mortality emerged and then widened to the 40% we see today. So the graphs from the last few slides represent work done by another arm of the intramural research program, our surveillance research department. We work hand in hand with the surveillance research group, but I am a cancer epidemiologist in the Department of Population Science, which is led by Dr. Alpa Patel, who many of you probably know from her many years as both an ACS volunteer and staff member. Our population science group conducts research on the causes and prevention of cancer diagnosis, cancer survival, and quality of life after a cancer diagnosis. And we do this using large studies of individuals who are cancer-free at the start of the study. We've been doing this type of cohort study work since the 1950s. And a unique aspect of these ACS cancer cohorts compared to any other in the world is that our study participants have all been recruited using the amazing network of ACS volunteers like you. This is not something that anyone else could or would be able to pull off. And we really are so grateful that you've made this research possible. So to give you a little bit of a window in the short time that we have into what this means, what kind of work we do in breast cancer, these cohort studies collect data over decades of time, and they start with people who have no cancer. So starting from before anyone in the study has been diagnosed with a cancer, we then study differences in the participants who go on to get a cancer from those who do not. The cohorts that we actively use for breast cancer research today are the Cancer Prevention Study 2 and the Cancer Prevention Study 3, which, as Desiree mentioned earlier, is our most recent study, and some of you may have even been involved in recruiting participants for that study, or you may be participants yourself. In these studies, our participants fill out surveys, give us a waist measurement, a blood sample, tumor tissue samples, and most of all, their time and dedication to this research. So what kinds of things have we learned from these studies? One of the first questions we get asked as breast cancer epidemiologists is how much of my cancer is inherited? How much is predetermined, and how much of my risk comes from my genetics? It's currently thought that only about 10% of breast cancers are caused solely by your genetics at birth. But this is an active area of research, and we continue to learn more about how genetics alone and in combination with your environment might increase or decrease your risk of breast cancer. Because of the large number of participants needed to study the large potential genetic mutation combinations and combinations with other factors, we usually do this work alongside researchers across the globe. So beyond the few rare genetic mutations that have been identified, like BRCA1 and BRCA2 that many of you are familiar with, there are very few individual risk factors that have been identified as strongly impacting breast cancer risk on their own. There are more rare genetic mutations that together add up to greater risk, and there are other factors both inside the body having to do with early or late menopause, or outside the body having to do with physical activity or cigarette smoking or alcohol consumption. But for the most part, each of those has a small contribution on their own, and it's most likely an accumulation of multiple factors over a lifetime that determines who goes on to get breast cancer and who does not. Much of our focus at ACS intramural research is to identify and understand risk factors that are modifiable, that is, factors that can be changed by individuals, populations, or policies to help reduce the risk of developing breast cancer for all women. One of the many reasons that breast cancer research is so complicated is that we now understand that there are several distinct types of breast cancer. There are many ways to subtype different cancers, but our current understanding of breast cancer subtypes, in that the way that we define breast cancer for both research and clinical purposes, is in these four categories: luminal A, luminal B, HER2 enriched, and triple negative breast cancers. A little less than half of all breast cancers fall into that luminal A group. These are the most hormone responsive tumors, and they tend to be less aggressive tumors with good prognosis, in part because we have treatments that target estrogen and progesterone hormone receptors. On the other end of the spectrum are what we call triple negative tumors. These cancers tend to have poor prognosis, in part because we do not have good treatment options for these cancers. Triple negative breast cancers are most common among Black compared to white women, and understanding why we see these differences by race is something we hope to be able to study with new funding in the future. In addition to differences in survival and clinical characteristics between these subtypes of breast cancer, we're beginning to understand that risk factors are different for these different types of breast cancer. Some factors, like the hormone responsive cancers, are associated with having had positively associated with, are associated with a reduced risk of breast cancer if you've had a baby. However, for triple negative breast cancers, it looks like there is a positive association, meaning an increased risk with having had a baby. Other risk factors, like family history, are associated with all types of breast cancer. Understanding whether factors like having had a baby can be modified by other risk factors like breastfeeding is an active area of my research that I hope to pursue. And that's a very brief overview of where we've been in breast cancer epidemiology research, but I also wanted to use our remaining time to give you a quick window into where the field is going. Much of our current work in really all cancer research, but including breast cancer research, is narrowing in on a more precise definition of these exposures to better predict the impact that they have on breast cancer risk. For example, we know that physical activity, including walking, lowers risk of breast cancer, but we don't know if a 3-hour walk one day gives you the same benefit as a 30-minute walk 6 days per week. Some of the ways in which we're working to get more precise exposure information is through research-grade activity monitoring devices like a Fitbit, but a little bit more accurate, stool samples, location-based analyses around a participant's home, and through our new participant portal where participants can upload information from their doctors or other sources. For most of these study enhancements, we only have this information on a subset of participants. This is in part because of the added expense needed to collect this more detailed information, but it is vital to understanding better what causes breast cancer for which women. The other way in which we are continuing to improve our understanding of breast cancer is that we are understanding breast cancers themselves. And we're learning that they can give us clues about who is more likely to survive their cancer and how we can intervene. We look at tumor DNA, tumor RNA, as well as immune cells to better understand what features of the tumor itself are associated with better outcomes and better treatment response. One of the new ways we're doing this research that I'm super excited about is using machine learning techniques, which essentially means we're using computers and their artificial intelligence to analyze digital images of the tumor. Some of these analyses are things that can be done by a human, but they take a very, very long time. And others are an agnostic approach where we let the computer just do their thing and tell us what they see. In addition to understanding cancer outcomes, we're also learning that there may be clues in the tumor itself about what caused it. I am currently working with colleagues at Cornell University and Harvard University to study these what are called tumor mutational signatures in triple-negative breast cancers to try to see if we can get clues about what causes these very rare but very aggressive cancers. And I hope to expand this work to other types of breast cancer in the future. So in summary, the research we do in the Department of Population Science is done with a variety of tools captured from questionnaires and various biologic samples, and we use this information to understand cancer across the continuum, starting from a healthy individual through the development of precancerous cells, through the cancer diagnosis, and ultimately cancer survival. For prevention, the goal is to put everything we know about what makes breast cancer risk and survival higher or lower together to make personalized recommendations in the future that can empower women with specific strategies to reduce their own risk of getting or dying from breast cancer. This personalized approach will also help women identify the best screening strategy for them and to fight each woman's breast cancer with a treatment plan that is most likely to help them and least likely to cause unintended harm. The ultimate goal is the right intervention for the right person at the right time in their life. And to finish up, I want to say that you can imagine that all of these research enhancements are necessary to continue to grow the field of breast cancer research, but they're also very expensive. On top of that, COVID-19 has set us back tremendously in many ways, and our teams are working tirelessly to get back to where we were and continue to make progress in this fight. Preventive behaviors such as physical activity, sedentary lifestyles, and diet worsened during the pandemic. I'm sure we can all relate to that. I know I can. Breast cancer screening rates also plummeted during the pandemic, and that's what I want to show you here on this graph. Many cancers may go undiagnosed or diagnosed at a later stage with poorer prognosis. So what you see here are data from a large electronic health records database, and you can see the huge dip shown in pink in breast cancer screening in 2020. While it's hopeful that things have started to rise again into 2021, we see you can see here from the graph that we're still not back to where we started. And where we started was still not where we want to be or where we should be, especially in terms of health disparities, which are now even worse than ever. And ensuring health equity is one of ACS's top priorities for the future. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Terrace. You've covered quite a bit of ground there, and I'm fascinated. I know we all are by all the work you're doing. I know my mother is a breast cancer survivor and an American Cancer Society researcher, saved her life. So I can't imagine, you know, you're just helping so many people, and we can't thank you enough what you and your team are doing. And, you know, that's why it's so important to fund the future. And so thank you. Please feel free, folks, to drop in your questions in the chat. We have a few more minutes left. We have about 9 minutes. We're going to get to as many as we can. So Dr. Terrace, our first question, you mentioned the expansion of breast cancer health equity work. What does that mean, and why is it important to the breast cancer fight?
Yeah, thanks, Desiree. We at ACS believe that behind every breast cancer diagnosis, there is an individual woman with a unique perspective, challenges, and needs. And we're committed to reduce and ultimately, we hope to eliminate the disparities in breast cancer through research, advocacy, patient services, and education. This is a multifaceted problem, of course, and it is going to require a multifaceted approach. So currently, we're working on identifying the best plan for ACS to have the most impactful approach to this problem. Areas where we've identified gaps that need to be filled are improved care coordination across fragmented systems, from primary care through actual breast cancer treatment and beyond. Integrated care for the whole patient, including recognizing the challenges that people have in financial, transportation, mental health, other physical health challenges that may simultaneously be impacting breast cancer patients and future breast cancer patients. And finally, improving trust and trustworthiness between patients and the healthcare system, which is another problem that COVID-19 has greatly highlighted, is something that we need to figure out for the future.
It's so important, access to care, and, you know, your zip code should not matter, you get care. So all these things that you bring up are so important. Thank you. Another question we got, is the recent rise due to an increased amount of carcinogens in our individual environments, or is it because of increased test or something different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I showed you on the graph early on where the increase in mammography screening, you could really see that into the early 80s and 90s, and that is often a reason why we see increases. But we don't think that the recent increases have to do with screening improvements. In fact, you know, screening rates have stayed fairly stable, and as we've talked about with the pandemic, they're actually getting a bit worse. We do think that it is factors, other risk factors that are likely in increasing the risk of breast cancer. Some of them include the fact that our reproductive plans as a society have sort of changed. Fewer women are having babies or having babies later, both of which we know ultimately increase the risk of at least the most common types of breast cancer, and also overweight and obesity. As a society, I completely understand how we are where we are, but that's been an increasing problem over time, and we're starting to see the lifetime impacts of carrying extra body weight from a younger age through older ages. So those are two reasons why we may be seeing this increase now.
Thank you for that insight. So many believe that precision medicine is a game changer, and the American Cancer Society is funding some pretty exciting research grants related to the precision medicine. Can you share a few examples of those?
Sure. Yes, as I mentioned in my talk, precision prevention, screening, and treatment are all part of precision medicine that are ultimately the goal, and we're very excited to be funding some of this work. So some of the projects that we have funded include a blood test that can monitor cancer treatment response. This is huge because the other alternative are repeated biopsies, which are painful. There's a small risk of infection every time you have to go in, and it's very invasive to the patient. Being able to just test with a blood test would be a huge game changer. Also, several grants to look at targeted treatments, so targeting the actual cells in that person that are responsible for the breast cancer, and that we can reverse its effects. And lastly, new models that can predict who might be at higher risk for breast cancer so that we can target them for other types of screening. We know that mammography is not great at identifying those triple negative breast cancers that I mentioned before. And so having other types of screening for women who are at higher risk for those cancers might be needed. And so this type of risk prediction modeling is another area that we are funding.
Thank you. We're getting a ton of questions and we got about 4 minutes. We're going to try to do a quick little rapid fire here at our fireside chat. So how do laws, policy, and politics play a role in breast cancer research, and how has ACS CAN helped? Are there barriers?
You know, ACS CAN and ACS work together side by side, and it's really a back and forth relationship, which is really, really great. Research identifies gaps that are needed, things that we know need policy changes to help patients and help the community so that we can prevent breast cancers, but it works the other way too. Sometimes our ACS CAN folks tell us, this is something that people want, but we don't know what we need to do or what problem, how to go about it. So that research projects can develop out of those questions that come from CAN. So we work back and forth in a symbiotic relationship to try to fight breast cancer from our relative perspectives.
Thank you. What specifically are you most excited for the future breast cancer research studies?
Oh, it's so hard to narrow it down. You know, I'm just really excited about this precision that we are getting, where we are finally at the point where we can start to take all these pieces together and be able to make these more personalized recommendations, which is not something we've been able to do in the past. So I'm very excited to be able to better understand why, you know, one woman is exposed to one thing and gets breast cancer and another isn't. And if we can define more precisely those exposures and the type of cancer, and who should get screened and who shouldn't, I think that's going to be a really exciting place for the future.
Tight on time, but 2 questions I want to get to. Why would breastfeeding be a cause for getting breast cancer?
Oh, thank you for asking that question, because I'm sorry that I led you down that misinformation path. No, actually breastfeeding does the opposite. It actually lowers risk of breast cancer. And so we do have pretty good evidence at this point that breastfeeding lowers your risk of at least some types of breast cancer. And this is particularly true, likely, for the triple negative breast cancers, the ones for which we don't know a lot of other things about them. So those have been some very exciting, very recent findings that we still need to do some more work to firm up. But also what I was saying is that having had a baby in the long run tends to lower risk of the more common types of breast cancer, but it increases risk of those rare triple negative breast cancers. There is some research that that I hope to be able to dig into more that shows that breastfeeding might be able to reverse that increase in breast cancer risk. So both may reduce breast cancer risk on its own and also be able to reverse some of the increase from having had a baby.
Oh, thank you for clearing that up. Okay, last question before we close, and we're going to try to get to all these questions offline, but thank you for all the attendees for sending these in. You guys are awesome. Everyone who's participating in today's fireside chat. What is the reason for the disparities in outcomes in women in color, and how can we change that?
Yeah, great question. And that is what I was saying at the beginning about breast health equity and how we need to dive into that. we know some things. We know some reasons. We know that Black women specifically tend to be diagnosed at a later stage, but even at every stage, tend to be more likely to die. We know that there are delays oftentimes between when someone's diagnosed and when they begin to be treated. But digging into the reasons why and how we can intervene is what we really need to do in the future. And so I'm really looking forward to both using what we know and doing research into what we don't know to try to tackle that problem.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, your insight has been amazing. You know, you have quick final thought before we leave our wonderful group today?
My final thought is just that we're so grateful to all of you who make this work possible. With so many competing requests for fundraising these days, we appreciate the passion and the drive that you bring to make sure this fight against the most common cancer in the world is kept in the forefront. I'm happy to try to answer any more questions that you have via email or another method. And thank you all for listening today. We so appreciate all that you do.
Well, Dr. Terrace, we so appreciate all that you do in helping save lives from this terrible disease. So thank you for your insight and, you know, making someone like myself, who's not a science person, understand it. So thank you. We also want to thank Cynthia, our wonderful volunteer, for joining us today, and all of our wonderful participants. So thank you for joining us. After hearing from Dr. Terrace, I think it is clear why it's so critical to fuel and sustain this amazing research. So together we will unlock better treatment options, fuel advancements in detection, and most importantly, afford more time for those survivors, counting on us, the American Cancer Society, and all of you to fight this disease with them each and every day. So by harnessing the power of this group, we can change the lives of the women and men facing breast cancer, the providers, the survivors, and thrivers we serve across the nation. So we can't thank you enough. Your support is crucial, and we are so grateful. And I'd be remiss if I didn't end with a simple reminder and a call to action for all of you. Please ensure you and your loved ones are still prioritizing cancer screenings. Go get your screenings done. I've already gotten mine done. Make a plan to get screened this October if you haven't already. Once again, thank you for joining us. Gracias por todo. We thank you for all that you do, and we are so excited what you are going to do this October and beyond to lead the fight for a world without breast cancer. Stay safe, everyone. Adios. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.